The void stretches before me, endless and indifferent. Stars bleed like fractured promethium, distant and cold. I have seen worlds fall. Entire hives crumble beneath the weight of their own decay. Yet nothing prepared me for the raw weight of this Imperium. I have flown across galaxies, shattered the atmospheres of worlds with a single wing beat. Yet here, beneath the gaze of Terra and the silent vigil of the Golden Throne, I feel small. Even the mightiest warrior of the Adeptus Astartes would pause at the sheer immensity of its bureaucracy, the grinding machinery of survival, and the whispered prayers that cling to every stone and servitor alike. And yet, the battle calls. The fire of war is universal, and I know that my hands, my wings, my very presence can tip scales that others dare not touch. Before we go any further, I need to be honest with you. Sometimes I look into this endless void, and I see that 99% of you wander these stories but never swear your allegiance. If you stand with me among these tales of war, faith, and fire, then subscribe. It means more than you know. It helps these chronicles of the Imperium reach others who still remember what humanity once was. And tell me, from which world, hive, or system do you watch? I always read your messages. It reminds me that even across the stars, the spirit of mankind still listens. The sky above Hive Varix burned with the pale, sickly light of distant suns filtered through ash and smoke. I descended silently at first, my wings slicing the acrid haze like blades of impossible steel. From this height, the world was a patchwork of suffering. Collapsed manufactorums leaking molten ore into the streets, conveyor belts twisted and frozen mid-operation, and the restless tide of humanity swarming through alleys slick with refuse and fear. The air reeked of promethium, scorched metal, and desperation, and each inhalation reminded me that no matter how far I had flown, no matter how many worlds I had witnessed crumble under my own hand, nothing prepared me for the raw, grinding vulnerability of these people. Yet even here, survival thrummed in their veins, stubborn and defiant. I felt it ripple upward, brushing against my awareness like the tremor of a distant pulse. From the void of my altitude, I saw a scavenger clutching a scorched data slate, her eyes wide as she whispered the name I had not yet revealed to them. It spread instantly, a virus of awe and terror. A godlike figure had come. Some said I could rend the sky itself with a single strike. Others swore I would lift the fallen hives upon my wings. And the truth was simpler and darker. I could do all that, but I also could choose to watch them fail, to let the ground claim their fragile lives while I floated above, untouchable. There was a morality here that belonged not to them, not even to me, but to the universe itself, a calculus of consequence as indifferent as the stars. I clenched my fists, feeling the tension of muscle and sinew, and remembered that power, however absolute, was not always action. The streets of Varix writhed like a living thing. Gangs moved through the rubble, their bodies painted in soot and blood, fighting over the remnants of a lost industrial cache. Psychers lurked in shadowed doorways, eyes glowing with borrowed light, muttering prayers to gods I did not yet understand. Servitors, their faces encased in rusted iron and glowing cogitator panels, stumbled blindly, following commands that had long since lost meaning. And through it all, the humans pressed on, a tide of fragility that refused to break despite every imaginable deprivation. Every step, every desperate calculation, was mirrored in the way the smoke danced and the fires flickered, a ballet of survival conducted in ash and flame. I descended closer, wings folding like iron sails, and the wind that surged past me carried the taste of industry and decay. The sound of shattering steel and crying civilians melded into a single cadence, one that resonated in a part of me I did not often acknowledge: admiration. It was not a sentiment I indulged lightly. I had fought enemies who were gods and monsters, yet here was life clinging with stubborn dignity to the edge of annihilation, refusing the simple mercy of surrender. I could feel the hive's heartbeat, a staccato rhythm of fear, hope, and exhaustion, and I realized that even as an interloper from worlds beyond their comprehension, I was entangled in its rhythm. To intervene was to become part of the narrative, to shape it irrevocably. To refrain was to witness history unfold with all its cruelty and beauty intact. A squad of Skitari marched across a shattered plaza below, their skeletal forms moving with terrifying precision. They did not look up. They were part of the hive's mechanism, cogs in a machine older than many planets I had passed over. I hovered, studying them, noting the subtle hesitations in their step, small flaws barely perceptible that hinted at the human behind the machine. or perhaps the machine behind the human. There was poetry in this, a rhythm of existence that refused the simple binaries of power and weakness. The smoke coiled around their armored limbs like a serpent, and I felt a strange kinship with it, neither fully solid nor entirely spirit, both observer and actor in a drama far larger than any single life. Then the whispers began, carried on the wind and into the ears of those who dared lift their eyes. Stories of my descent spread faster than the fire, faster than the collapse. They spoke of a being who could stand amidst the ruins, wings spanning entire city blocks, who could crush a war band of orcs with a single stroke, or lift a collapsed habdome without effort. Superstition intertwined with rumor, and I could almost hear the prayers as they leapt from throat to throat. I did not correct them. It was not yet time. The world needed its stories. It needed myth as much as it needed me. I touched down at the edge of a promethium spill, the heat blistering even through my skin. Civilians froze in terror, then fascination. A child clutched her mother's skirt, eyes wide and shining, and in that gaze I saw the fragile, burning hope of humanity. The thing they carried even as the fires consumed everything around them. I reached down, hesitated, and the ground trembled beneath the weight of wings that could have cleaved mountains. Survival was messy, hope was messy, and power. Power was neither clean nor benevolent. It was a choice. And for the first time in this war-torn hive, I realized that the choices I made here would echo far beyond the ash and steel, far beyond the whispers and fear, into the unseen reaches of the Imperium itself. As I rose again, circling above the ruined skyline, the smoke and fire and cries merged into a single vision of consequence, and then I understood. My presence here was no longer a whisper, no longer rumor. It had become inevitability. The city, its people, its machinery, all bent toward the same truth. The world would reckon with me, and I would reckon with the world. I tilted my wings against the wind and allowed myself to drop once more toward the chaos below. Every human, every Skitarii, every flicker of flame and shadow mattered in ways I could not yet calculate. The stories had begun, and the first chapter of this war would not end until every eye had looked up and understood what it meant to witness power unrestrained. The manufactorums never slept. Even as the hive above them crumbled, their machines groaned and bled molten metal into the veins of the earth, as though refusing to die. I drifted through the fractured ceilings of those colossal chambers, watching fire pour from broken ducts and hearing the rhythmic clang of still-functioning forges, ghostly heartbeats of a dead industry. Sparks showered across assembly lines frozen mid-motion, their servo arms locked in gestures of forgotten purpose. The air stank of ozone, burnt oil, and old death. And beneath it all, I could hear the whispers, half chant, half static, a litany of superstition carried by desperate workers and fearful adepts. They said the angels had returned, that one of them had fallen to judge their sins, that the Emperor himself had sent a herald to remind them that faith was not a luxury but a weapon. I landed atop a cracked gantry, its structure shivering beneath my weight. Below, lines of workers toiled in silence under the cold stare of their overseers, men who had long surrendered their humanity to augmentation. Their augmetic limbs hissed and clicked, their voices reduced to monotone vox-grill commands, yet even they trembled when a sudden wind tore through the hall, swirling ash into shapes that almost resembled wings. I saw it in their eyes, that flicker of primal belief, that ancient memory of fear and reverence. They did not know me, but they felt the gravity of something that should not be here, and perhaps in that moment neither did I. The first Skitarii squad arrived without warning. I could sense them before I heard them. A static pulse in the air, sharp and rhythmic like an electric heartbeat. They emerged from the haze in perfect formation, every movement measured, every sound precise. Their eyes, or rather the lenses that replaced them, glowed faintly red in the gloom. They were not here to protect the workers. They were here to maintain order, to ensure that production, even in ruin, did not falter. The Imperium tolerated chaos only when it served the ledger of survival. One of them raised a weapon, a galvanic rifle humming with coiled energy. And I understood what came next was not a battle, but a declaration. I dropped from the gantry. The air screamed as I fell, a blur of flesh and fury carving through smoke and ember. When I struck the floor, the world cracked open. Shockwaves shattered glass and scattered tools like confetti. The Skitarii opened fire in a disciplined storm of blue-white energy. but the beams ricocheted off my skin, cutting molten furrows in the walls behind me. I moved between them like a shadow given form, every strike a thunderclap, every impact final. Metal limbs twisted, armor split, and mechanical voices crackled out half-formed prayers to the Omnissiah before falling silent. When it ended, the forge was quiet again. Only the steady drip of promethium and the faint hum of damaged machinery filled the void. The workers stared, wide-eyed and trembling, not with fear alone, but with something deeper, awe mingled with guilt. One of them, her hand still clutching a half-forged component, whispered a single word: Angel. It wasn't the first time I'd been called that, but it felt different here. There was no flattery in it, no gratitude, only confusion. They lived in a universe where angels meant destruction as often as salvation, where the line between divine and monstrous was drawn in the blood of the innocent. I wondered which kind I was to them. Perhaps both. I turned my gaze upward. The forge towers rose like cathedrals, their heights lost in the smog, and I could almost feel the vibrations of hymns echoing through the metal. In this place, faith and function were one. Every hammer strike a prayer, every gear a sigil. And I understood the Imperium's madness more clearly than ever. It did not build machines to serve men. It built men to serve machines, to serve the endless hunger of survival disguised as devotion. I had seen civilizations fall for less, and yet they endured. One of the wounded Skitarii dragged itself upright, its voice glitching through a burst of static. Unidentified. Xenos, entity, cease. The sound was almost pathetic, the defiance admirable. I approached slowly, not out of mercy, but out of curiosity. Its remaining eye flickered weakly, red to white, white to black. I am not your enemy, I told it, but I am not your servant either. The machine froze, as if parsing the words for meaning it was not programmed to understand. Then, with one final spark, it collapsed, a machine praying in silence to a god that had never answered. In the aftermath, I heard the murmurs ripple through the remaining workers. They spoke of me in low tones, passing stories like offerings. Some said I had descended to test their faith. Others believed I was punishment, an executioner sent from the throne itself. I neither confirmed nor denied it. I had learned that belief is a weapon sharper than any blade. And here, in this world of gears and ghosts, belief could ignite empires or burn them to ash. The forge lights flickered, one by one, until only a single lumen glowed above me. Its light reflected off the pools of molten steel like a fractured sun. I looked into that reflection and saw not a god, not a man, but something caught between both. A being out of place, a force without allegiance. And yet, in their eyes, I had already become legend. That realization lingered, heavy and inevitable, as I took to the air once more, wings tearing through the smoke toward the night sky. Above the forge, the world stretched in bruised color, red and black, ash and fire. Vox chatter began to spread like infection, frantic and fragmented. Reports of unidentified angelic entities, of manufactorum collapses, of machine spirits crying out in pain. Somewhere far beyond this hive, someone would hear those reports, and somewhere even farther on worlds I could not yet name, that story would take root, growing into something far greater than truth. The Imperium had felt my presence now, and in its labyrinth of faith, rumor, and obedience, stories were the first contagion. The deeper I descended into the hive, the more the air itself seemed to rot. The upper manufactorums were chaos and flame, but down here, below the habstacks, beneath the dripping steel arteries of the city, humanity had become a rumor. The tunnels pulsed with dim lumen strips that flickered like dying stars, casting jagged light across the walls scrawled with half-legible prayers and blood. The scent was a mixture of burnt meat, sump oil, and despair, and it clung to the lungs like a curse. Each step echoed against metal grates slick with moisture that was not water, and the sound followed me like a ghost. These were the warrens the administratum forgot, the place where the Emperor's light reached only as an idea, not a presence. The men and women here had long stopped looking upward. Survival was measured not in faith, but in breath. I passed between them unseen at first, my cloak of shadow and silence wrapped close. I could have crushed them all without effort, but they didn't even warrant fear. They were pale and hollow-eyed, children of deprivation and secrecy. They spoke in whispers, bartering scraps of fungus bread for promises, trading heirlooms for another hour of air. Yet even here, amid this decay, the rumors had spread. A mother clutching a fevered child murmured about the angel of fire who had slain the iron soldiers above. A pack of scavenger youths argued over whether I was a demon or a saint, while one, no older than 16 Terran years, claimed he had seen me in his dreams, bathed in light that burned without smoke. I watched them through the haze and wondered how swiftly hope and madness entwined when faith starved long enough. In the Imperium, rumor could kill as surely as hunger. It was currency, sustenance, weapon, all at once. I followed the tunnels until I reached what passed for a marketplace, a circular cavity where pipes met in a lattice of dripping condensation. There humans gathered to trade, their eyes darting constantly to the shadows. A gang armed with crudely reforged autoguns watched from the periphery. The leader's coat was stitched from what looked like flayed servo fabric, and his voice carried the authority of hunger made flesh. He barked orders to his underlings, warning them that angels or no, we hold this ground. I could have left him to his illusions of power. Instead, I stepped forward. The crowd froze. Conversation died mid-breath. The gang raised their weapons, and for an instant the world contracted to the sound of safeties clicking. Then the smallest movement, a child's gasp, set everything in motion. They fired, muzzle flashes illuminating the chamber in brutal strobes. Bullets tore through the air and struck me uselessly, flattening or ricocheting off my skin. I walked through them without slowing. When I reached their leader, he was still shouting, his voice cracking beneath the sound of his own death sentence. My hand closed around the barrel of his weapon. It bent like wax. His eyes met mine, defiant, terrified, human. I didn't kill him. Instead, I lifted him effortlessly and let him see what stared back at him. Not wrath, but judgment. Then I threw him aside. The silence that followed was holy. The market bowed in wordless fear. I felt the weight of their gazes pressing against me, heavy as gravity. I said nothing. Words here would only corrupt the moment. To them, I was proof. Proof that the galaxy still contained beings who could defy the mechanical cruelty of existence. Or perhaps I was its cruelest reminder. Either way, they would make me myth before dawn. As I turned to leave, a low hum filled the tunnel. At first, I mistook it for machinery, but it carried the cadence of human voices. A group of robed figures emerged from the deeper corridors, each carrying candles fashioned from recycled wax and tallow. Their leader, a gaunt priest with circuitry woven into his scalp, raised a trembling hand. "We saw you in the smoke," he whispered. The Emperor's wrath made flesh. "The light walks again." His voice was thick with devotion and terror. "Tell us your name, angel. Tell us how to serve." For a heartbeat, I considered it. I could have spoken, could have given them a name, and they would have built a religion around it by nightfall. But I had learned that once a god gives a name, mortals build prisons around it. I only shook my head. "Serve your people," I said softly. "Not your fear." The words seemed to wound him more than any blade. He fell to his knees, sobbing into the dirt. Behind him, the other acolytes did the same. I left them as I had found them, half-believers in the dark. My wings brushed the low ceiling as I rose through a shaft that led toward the higher districts, the gust scattering their candles into the filth. For a moment, their tiny flames flickered like stars, stubbornly refusing extinction. That small defiance filled me with something dangerously close to respect. When I broke through the next level, I emerged into a storm. The hive's upper vents howled, vomiting black smoke into an atmosphere already poisoned by centuries of industry. The cityscape stretched outward in impossible geometry, spires stabbing upward like spears, catwalks webbing the air, a billion lights flickering behind layers of grime. I hovered there, feeling the pulse of a living planet beneath me, and realized that the rumors born in the tunnels below were already climbing, spreading like contagion through Vox networks and desperate hearts alike. In the distance, I saw the silhouettes of Imperial gunships cutting through the smog, sleek, predatory shapes bearing the seal of the Aquila. The Arbits were moving. They had heard. The Imperium would come not to understand but to contain, to erase, to preserve its fragile illusion of order. I welcomed it. Let them come with all their law, their faith, their fear. Let them see what power unbound truly looked like. And still, as lightning split the clouds above me, I could not silence one thought that grew louder than the storm. Perhaps I had not come here to test them. Perhaps this world, this brutal hive of dust and devotion, had come to test me. Rumors travel faster than light, Imperium. not through warp lines or sanctioned channels, but through the trembling mouths of the faithful. By the time the second dawn broke over Hive Varix, my presence had already become scripture. Vox transmissions whispered of an angel descending in fire. Data slates in the hands of junior clerks recorded anomalies in atmospheric density. Flight vectors that made no sense within physical law. Pilgrims lit candles at the edges of hab blocks, praying to an image they could not see, while enforcers stormed lower sectors to silence what could not be silenced. I remained above it all, a shadow beneath the rising sun. My wings caught the morning light, scattering it into shards that painted the smog gold. Below me, the hive burned with a strange kind of hope, fragile, feverish, and unsustainable. Humanity did not crave truth. It craved meaning, and I had become its mirror. Across the city, the ecclesiarchy moved like a tide. Priests emerged from hidden cathedra, their sermons rising over the sound of machinery and mourning. They called me the flame of the throne, the harbinger of judgment, the voice of the emperor's wake. Each title spread like fire, and I could almost hear the collective heartbeat of billions quickening. What I could not hear but knew all too well were the whispers echoing through higher channels, the ones that did not pray, but prepared. On the upper spires, far above the ash, a meeting was taking place. The planetary governor's chamber was a cathedral of glass and steel, walls engraved with the imperial aquila, the floor veined with gold from the mines of forgotten worlds. I could see them through the fractured transparency of the structure. Nobles, officers, adepts, all gathered around a hollow display flickering with my likeness, captured grainy and indistinct. The governor's face was a mask of strain. Sleeplessness had carved deep lines into his features. He turned to his advisors and demanded answers. None had any. The words Xenos, Psyker, divine visitation, and heresy collided like blades in the air. Every theory was a reflection of their fear. From my perch on a broken spire, I could almost hear their thoughts. To them, divinity was as dangerous as rebellion. If the people believed a celestial had come, faith might turn from the emperor to something new, something uncontrolled. The Imperium tolerated miracles only when it could claim them as its own, and this I thought it could not. The wind shifted, carrying the distant hum of engines. Custodian patrols. They did not come often to worlds like this, but when they did, the air itself learned reverence. Their golden armor glinted like the promise of salvation and the certainty of death. I had no intention of meeting them yet. Not here. The story still needed to unfold. I descended toward a shrine district that had erupted overnight. Pilgrims gathered around a crater where I had once struck the ground. They had ringed it with scavenged candles and offerings, broken purity seals, fragments of cogitators, bits of gilded scrap that once adorned machines. A priest stood at the center, his robe stitched from banners long torn in war. He was young, perhaps too young, but his voice was steady as he spoke. He fell from the heavens as the emperor once did. He burns with our pain. He tests our faith not by granting mercy, but by showing us our reflection. Their faces were gaunt, their hands trembling. Yet their eyes shone with something luminous. Belief. I felt it reaching toward me like hands through smoke, intangible yet suffocating in its devotion. I could have stepped forward. I could have told them the truth, and that I was no angel, no god, no herald, that I had come from a place far beyond their imagining, where faith was not a fire but a burden. But I did not, because in that moment I saw what belief could do. It made them stand straighter. It made them forget the taste of ash and the weight of hunger. It gave their suffering shape, and I could not take that away from them. Not yet. A sound tore through the murmurs, the sharp bark of authority. Enforcers in black carapace armor stormed the square, pushing through the kneeling crowds. One grabbed the young priest, wrenching him to his knees. "Blasphemy," the officer hissed, pressing a shock baton against his throat. "You preach heresy in the Emperor's light." The priest looked up at me. Not in plea, in trust. I moved before I decided to move. The air cracked. The enforcer flew backward, armor crumpling under the force of impact. The others raised their weapons, but hesitation flickered in their eyes. I could feel the crowd's breath catching, the moment coalescing into something that would ripple across the Imperium like a pulse of thunder. I spoke only one sentence, but it carried further than any Vox signal could. Faith does not fear witness. The words were not planned. They rose from somewhere deep, instinctive, ancient. The crowd erupted, not in chaos but in reverence. They knelt as one. Candles toppled, smoke swirled, and above it all the shrine bell began to toll without a hand touching it. I turned and left before the first Arbite's reinforcements arrived. I could hear the cries fading behind me, growing distant and distorted. Already the story was changing. By dusk they would say I had descended in light, that my voice had shattered steel, that I had struck down a legion of enforcers with a thought. The Imperium would take that story, feed it to the masses, twist it into something convenient or forbidden. It didn't matter. The truth was irrelevant, because faith, I realized, was not born from truth. It was born from need, and humanity's need was endless. High above, thunder rolled across the smog-choked horizon. Lightning illuminated the towers like spires of a dying cathedral. I watched as the first transports of the Adeptus Custodes broke atmosphere, their hulls gleaming like suns. They were coming, not to worship but to judge, and in that sound of distant thunder, I heard it for the first time, the whisper of something vast and cold watching through me, a presence older than stars, amused and silent. Perhaps it was imagination, perhaps not. In the Imperium, even gods might dream. When the Custodes arrived, the world stopped breathing. Every hive, every factory, every trembling laborer felt the change in the air, a shift so deep it seemed to press against the soul. The sky fractured into light as the first of their transports cut through the cloud layers, leaving trails like burning scripture across the heavens. Vox channels screamed with static, then went dead. Even the wind fell silent, as if afraid to interrupt. I stood on the ruins of an old manufactorum, my wings folded close, my silhouette hidden in the smoke. Below me, millions waited, some in prayer, some in terror. None dared speak. The air itself carried the scent of sanctity and death. Then they emerged, the Adeptus Custodes, golden giants descending through the ash, each a living monument to the Emperor's perfection. Their armor caught the dying sun and turned it into flame. They did not walk. They advanced like inevitability made flesh. Every movement was purpose. Every glance was judgment. The world seemed to bow beneath their weight. There were 12 of them. No banners, no heralds, no words. Only silence. And in that silence, the faith of billions trembled. The lead custodian stepped forward. His armor bore the sigil of the Aquilan shield, though blackened along its edges as if kissed by war itself. His spear hummed softly, the air around it trembling with restrained power. When he spoke, his voice did not echo. It resonated, vibrating in bone rather than air. "You are not recorded in the Emperor's design," he said. "State your origin." The crowd dared not look up. They prostrated themselves, foreheads pressed to the ash, breathless and trembling. Only I remained standing. For a long moment I said nothing. The silence between us stretched thick as glass. Then quietly I answered, "I am what the Emperor remembers but no longer needs." His head tilted, the motion almost imperceptible. "Memory does not manifest," he replied. "Nor does it interfere with imperial doctrine. Doctrine," I said softly, "is built on what men believe he remembers." The words seemed to ripple through the custodes like an unseen current. Their formation shifted, and not aggression, but awareness. They were reading me, dissecting every breath, every flicker of motion. I could feel the weight of their gene-forged perception slicing through the veil I had woven around myself. One of them took a step forward. "The people call you the Flame," he said. "They kneel, they pray, and where faith gathers, rebellion follows." He was right. I could see it already. The embers of belief spreading faster than any decree could contain. Shrines had risen overnight. Pilgrims were abandoning their work to follow whispers of a miracle. The hive was becoming a sanctum, and sanctums were dangerous things. "The Emperor does not fear rebellion," I said, "only stagnation." For the first time, something, a flicker, a shadow, passed behind the custodian's golden helm. Doubt, or perhaps recollection. It was gone as soon as it appeared. They surrounded me then, forming a perfect circle. The air inside that circle felt thinner, reality itself tightening in their presence. I could hear the hum of their armor, the faint whisper of machine spirits stirred by proximity to something they did not understand. "You will come with us," the lead custodian said, "for examination. The ecclesiarch himself will decide your nature." I should have gone, should have surrendered. Let them weigh me in the scales of imperial law and vanish into whatever vault or sanctum housed those too inconvenient to destroy. But as his hand reached toward me, I saw movement in the crowd below. a small figure crawling forward through the dust. The young priest, the one from the crater. He raised a trembling hand toward me. His voice cracked raw from shouting prayers. "Don't let them take you," he cried. "You are proof that he still listens." The custodes turned their helms toward the sound. In that single moment of diverted attention, something ancient inside me broke its seal. The air convulsed. Sound fractured. I remember light. Not fire, not energy, but remembrance given form. Every candle in the shrine district ignited at once. The ground cracked beneath my feet. Veins of gold spreading through the blackened stone like lightning made solid. My wings unfurled not by will but by inevitability. And in that impossible, blinding moment I heard him. Not the emperor as worshipped, not the god entombed in a throne of gold, but the man he had once been. His memory, his exhaustion, his unending sorrow, it poured through me a tide of millennia, and I understood the truth too vast for words. The Imperium had mistaken his silence for approval. The custodes recoiled. Some raised their weapons. Others froze, transfixed. For the briefest instant, I saw something in their golden masks. Reflection. And it was not me they saw. It was him. When the light faded, I was gone. The shrine lay in ruins. The custodes stood motionless amid the ash. Their armor darkened, their silence unbroken. The priest was on his knees, tears cutting streaks through the soot on his face. He whispered a new prayer, one that would echo across the stars before the Inquisition could smother it. The flame has risen. The throne remembers. By nightfall, the message had spread through 10 systems. By dawn, it reached Terra. And somewhere deep within the Golden Throne, among the wires and machines that kept divinity imprisoned, something stirred. A flicker behind the Emperor's closed eyes. A single tear of light. Word of the flame reached Terra in whispers first. Vox fragments, pilgrim songs, half-corrupted data slates carried on smugglers' routes and trade tongues. But it wasn't the message itself that stirred the world. It was how quickly people believed it. They said a being with the Emperor's fire had walked among the hives of Jolanth, that he had spoken to the weak and burned before the custodes themselves without being consumed. Some called it a miracle, others heresy. But belief spreads faster than decree. And Terra, ancient and dying, began to dream again. I felt it even before the first inquisitorial orders were issued. Somewhere across that endless distance, billions of hearts tilted toward faith. Not the distant ossified worship of the Imperium, but something dangerous, something alive. I could taste it like static in the warp, a collective intake of breath, a tremor of awakening. Deep beneath the surface of holy Terra, where the air tasted of incense and dust, the Inquisition convened. In the black marble halls of the Tricorn Palace, the High Conclave gathered to decide what had to be done. They spoke of the incident with cold efficiency. The custodes had not failed. Their reports were sealed, their voices muted, but the imagery had already escaped into the hearts of men. That made it truth enough to fear. The Ordo Hereticus demanded immediate eradication, purge the planet, scour the sector clean. The Ordo Malleus argued restraint, that this being, if real, might serve as a herald or perhaps a tool. The Ordo Xenos said nothing. They merely observed, eyes unreadable behind augmetic lenses, their silence more dangerous than any threat. And above them all sat Inquisitor Mirren Valen, the woman they called the Veiled Saint of Terra. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the chamber like a blade. "You speak of eradication as if faith were fungus," she said. "But faith does not burn. It migrates. It survives in ash." She rose, robes whispering against the stone. "You will not erase this rumor. You will study it. Contain it. Observe who kneels," the others murmured. Some protested. One accused her of leniency bordering on blasphemy. She silenced him with a glance. "I have seen the God Emperor's face," she said. "He does not need defenders. He needs understanding." Outside, beyond the marble and sigils, the lower hive worlds of Terra trembled with something like hope. Workers sang while they died at their stations. Children traced burning wings into the soot on their walls. Even the ancient servitors paused sometimes, their flickering optics reflecting light that wasn't there. And within the ecclesiarchy, the schism began. Some priests whispered that the Emperor had sent a messenger to remind mankind of his will. Others, hardened by centuries of dogma, denounced the tale as warp-born deceit. But none could deny the numbers. Attendance at shrines had tripled. Pilgrims were arriving at the gates of the palace in tides, dragging their dying loved ones across the blood-soaked flagstones of the Sanctum Imperialis, begging for healing that would never come. Yet sometimes, in the faint candlelight, they swore they felt something, a warmth, a breath, a flicker of flame. I watched from far above the orbit of Mars, hidden in the shrouded wreckage of a forgotten cruiser, the Soul's Dusk. Its machine spirit was half dead, its vox arrays stuttering like a heart that had forgotten its rhythm. I listened to the transmissions of mankind, the prayers, the orders, the lies, and I understood what was unfolding. It was not rebellion. It was resurrection, a faith that did not belong to priests or inquisitors, a faith that remembered the Emperor not as a god of endless silence, but as a man who once fought for humanity. And still, I could not tell whether that was my doing or his. When I closed my eyes, I saw fragments, not memories, not dreams, but echoes of something greater. I saw the throne burning with unseen fire. I saw the custodes kneeling not to me, but to memory itself. And somewhere, buried deep within the rotting circuitry of the Astronomicon, I heard a voice whisper through the void, "The light you carry is not yours to command." For a moment, I thought it was the Emperor himself. But it was different, colder, older, almost mechanical. Like the hum of the throne when the universe grows too quiet. Then came the signal. The custodes had sealed Jolanthe under absolute quarantine. Orbital bombardment was authorized. The Inquisition wanted proof of loyalty, and so, the first world to kneel would be the first to burn. I stood on the bridge of the Soul's Dusk, surrounded by the soft hiss of recycled air and the faint pulse of failing systems, and I understood the cost of what I had awakened. To bring light to a dying galaxy was to set it aflame. As the first bombardment lances fell, slicing through clouds and faith alike, I whispered a prayer that was not mine. Let them see, even in death, that the Emperor still remembers. But deep inside me, a question grew, quiet, relentless, and heavy as a dying sun. If I was his memory, then what did it mean that I no longer obeyed? The sanctum beneath the golden throne was older than recorded time. Few living souls had ever walked its halls and returned whole. Those who did never spoke again, their tongues taken by vow or trauma. The air down there did not move like normal air. It carried the sound of eternity. Slow, grinding, metallic breathing that was not machine, nor wholly divine. Inquisitor Mirren Valen descended alone. The custodes had granted her limited sanction, a privilege extended only once in 1,000 years, and even then, under the quiet scrutiny of blades ready to strike at the first sign of heresy. Her torchlight painted the corridor in shifting amber, the metal walls etched with litanies so ancient the letters had begun to crumble. Every step she took echoed like a heartbeat inside a tomb too vast to measure. At the foot of the descent, she found the Gate of Silence. It was not gold, nor sanctified marble, but iron, scarred, pitted, and streaked with what looked like frozen tears. The sigils carved into it pulsed faintly, reacting to her presence. The guards who had escorted her this far remained behind. None crossed the threshold. She raised her hand, pressed her palm to the cold metal, and whispered the prayer she had memorized from forbidden texts. In his name, I seek not sight but understanding. The gate opened without sound. Inside, there was no throne, only the remnants of things built to sustain it. Veins of machinery that glowed with ghost light. Servitors fused to their posts, their flesh long since petrified beneath layers of sanctified grease and prayer script. A low hum filled the chamber, rising and falling in slow, ponderous rhythm. It was the sound of the Emperor dreaming. Mirren stepped forward, boots sinking into dust that might once have been human. The walls here were alive, data conduits pulsing like veins, carrying impossible information to the machine heart beyond. She touched one of the cables. For a moment it pulsed beneath her fingers, and she saw a flicker of fire across a ruined hive, golden wings unfurling, a figure speaking words no vox could capture. She staggered back, breath shallow. The visions were fragments, images buried deep in the soul of the throne, reliving events not through sight, but through memory. "You hear him too," said a voice. Mirren spun, weapon raised. A custodian stood in the half-light, his armor darkened, his face hidden behind the expressionless mask of gold. But there was no hostility in his stance, only weariness. "Who gave you permission to enter this sanctum?" she demanded. "I was born here," he said simply. His voice echoed soft but immense. "I guard what even my brothers have forgotten." She lowered her weapon slightly. "Then tell me, what is this place?" He looked up toward the endless ceiling, where cables vanished into blackness. "The throne does not merely sustain him," he said. "It contains him. Every thought, every fragment, every echo of his will passes through these veins. The Astronomicon is not powered by his life, and it is powered by his memory." The words sank into her like a blade of ice. "You mean, the light that guides humanity is not his living flame," the custodian finished. "It is the echo of what he once was. The Emperor does not shine. He remembers himself shining." For a long moment neither spoke. The hum of the throne deepened like distant thunder beneath their feet. Mirren stepped closer to one of the conduits, tracing its surface. "Then the being seen on Jolanth," she began. He nodded once. "A reflection, a memory made manifest. The throne leaks, Inquisitor, and when memory leaks, it dreams." She felt the enormity of it crushing her chest. The implications were unbearable. If the Emperor's essence, his remembrance, was spilling into reality, then the flame was not heresy, but consequence. "What happens," she whispered, "when a god begins to remember too much?" The custodian's eyes met hers through the mask's narrow slit. "Then the universe forgets what is real." Behind them, the throne stirred. The air trembled, heavy with static. Lights flickered. For the briefest instant, she heard voices, thousands of them, overlapping, pleading, praying. Every word she had ever heard uttered to the Emperor echoed back through the chamber. Now in reverse, as if the prayers themselves were being answered backward. Then came a single, impossible whisper, "He carries my light and my burden." Mirren fell to her knees, every nerve screaming. The custodian stepped forward, placing a hand upon the conduit, not in control, but in reverence. His voice shook. "He knows," he murmured. "The Emperor knows his shadow walks again." Outside, high above the palace, the Astronomicon pulsed, just once, bright enough to outshine every star visible to the human eye. For those brief seconds, every psyker in the galaxy convulsed, their minds filled with the image of burning wings and a voice that said only one thing: "Remember me." When Mirren rose again, she understood that her duty had changed. The Inquisition could not silence this truth. It could only witness it, but she also knew, and wherever the flame had gone, he was now watching. And the throne itself, long silent, had begun to speak. Terra burned in slow motion, not with fire or bombardment, but with the fever of belief. From orbit, the planet still gleamed, a jeweled corpse veined with light. But below, the surface writhed like something alive. Processions filled the causeways, endless tides of pilgrims carrying relics carved from bone, brass, and delusion. Voxcasters blared sermons day and night, each proclaiming a different truth. Some swore the Emperor had sent a sign, others that a false angel threatened the Imperium's soul. The ecclesiarchy split along fault lines that had been buried for millennia, and the cracks were widening by the hour. They called it the War of Faith, though at first there were no armies, only words. And yet those words struck harder than any bolter shell. Inquisitor Mirren Valen stood in the shadow of the great Basilica of St. Lorgain, its towers lost in smog and thunder. The marble steps below were slick with blood. Sermonists had fought one another with censers and knives, each chanting litanies over the corpses of the other. The custodes had withdrawn to the palace, refusing to intervene. Even the Adeptus Arbits had ceased their patrols, their precincts overrun by mobs shouting the flame's name. Valen had seen insurrection before. She had crushed rebellions, burned cults, erased names from history. But this was different. This was not the chaos of corruption. It was the chaos of faith rediscovered. Everywhere she went, she heard that same prayer, whispered like a secret between strangers. The throne remembers. In the underhive, priests anointed workers with oil that glowed faintly in the dark, claiming it was the flame's blessing. In the spire levels, nobles hosted clandestine vigils, pretending to despise heresy even as they leaned forward, desperate for any sign of renewal. Even among the Adeptus Mechanicus there were murmurs, tech priests speaking of impossible fluctuations within the Astronomicon's signal, as if the machine itself had begun to think. Valen returned to her chamber, the echoes of prayer following her like smoke. She had not slept in days. The reports on her data slates blurred together. Riots, uprisings, executions. Yet beneath it all she sensed a rhythm, a pattern too deliberate to be chance. And then one night she heard him again. The voice. It came through the vox static like a breath drawn through dying lungs. Not words at first, just presence. Then softly, "You have seen beneath the throne. You know what must end." She froze. "Who are you?" she whispered. The memory that would not die. The vox hissed, crackled, then fell silent. Across the stars, I, the flame, felt the same pulse. It rippled through the warp like a heartbeat, a synchrony between the dying god and the fragment he had cast into being. The galaxy stirred. Psychers screamed. Whole fleets reported seeing wings of light unfurling across the void, only to vanish before augurs could confirm them. I did not want to fight. I had seen too much war to believe in its purpose. But the Imperium had no language for peace, only categories of sanctioned violence. If I stayed hidden, the ecclesiarchy would devour itself. If I revealed myself, the Inquisition would come. So I did the one thing neither expected. I spoke. Not through vox, not through sight, but through faith itself. Every soul who had ever whispered my name felt it. A spark, a warmth in the chest, like the first breath after drowning. And then a thought. Not command, not doctrine, but understanding. Remember what he fought for. Not worship, but mankind itself. Across the hive worlds, the violence paused. Just for an instant, and that instant was enough. Valen felt it too. She clutched the Aquila at her neck and fell to her knees, eyes wide. Around her, the basilica's candles flared all at once, their flames bending toward the same unseen point. She understood then what the custodian had meant. The Emperor's memory was no longer contained. The throne was dreaming outward, but dreams have enemies. From the depths of the Inquisition came the purity orders, fleets and kill teams unleashed without restraint. The Ordo Hereticus declared total excommunication of the Flame's followers. Orbital bombardments began across a dozen systems. In their zeal, they burned entire worlds just as silent songs. I watched from the void, powerless to stop the slaughter. The light that was meant to remind humanity of its soul was now the excuse for its own destruction. The warp echoed with screams and static, and for the first time since my awakening, I doubted the purpose of my existence. Had the Emperor truly willed this, or had his endless suffering simply found another way to speak of its grief? In the heart of the Imperial Palace, Valen stood before the custodies once more. Her face was gaunt, eyes haunted. "You can't contain this," she said. "Every death feeds it. Every denial makes it stronger." The Golden Warrior inclined his head. "Then the throne must decide," he said. "We are only its reflection." Outside, lightning split the smog. The Astronomicon pulsed again, not steady but erratic, flickering like a dying star. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the psychers who tended its song began to weep. The Emperor was no longer silent. He was remembering himself awake. The Astronomicon's light faltered, and all the stars seemed to hold their breath. Across the void, navigators cried out in unison, some collapsing, others clawing at their temples as the sacred beacon stuttered like a failing heart. For a single eternal moment, the Imperium lost its direction. Ships drifted in the warp without guidance, caught in tides that whispered names no human tongue could speak. On Terra, the Adeptus Mechanicus reported impossible readings. The energy signature of the throne had spiked, then folded inward as though the Emperor himself had taken a breath. The galaxy trembled, and I felt him stir inside the silence. Vast, sorrowful, and alive. I descended through the atmosphere of Terra, cloaked in flame and memory. My wings tore the sky open, casting shadows over the hive towers like the ghosts of angels long extinct. The air burned with faith. Millions looked up and wept. Vox networks overloaded as cities screamed my name. In the palace, the custodies gathered. No alarms were sounded. There was no need. The Emperor's chosen did not fear what they had already been made to die for. They took their stations without words, golden statues awaiting judgment. Inquisitor Mirren Valen stood alone before the Eternity Gate. The heat of the moment pressed against her skin like a living presence, sweat and sanctity mingling in the air. The massive doors behind her, doors that had not opened in 10,000 years, trembled as though the throne itself were breathing. She saw the sky ignite, and she knew I had returned. When my feet touched the marble of the sanctum, the world itself seemed to recoil. The Aquila symbols carved into the walls glowed red, then gold, then white-hot until they melted into pure light. The air tasted of iron and dust and old prayers. Servitors collapsed, their circuits overwhelmed by something they could not process. Divinity in motion. Valen stepped forward, her hand outstretched, her face torn between awe and terror. "You came back," she whispered. "I never left," I said. My voice carried not through sound, but through the marrow of those who still dared to hope. The custodes advanced, encircling me, their blades humming softly. They did not raise them, they knew. Each of them could feel it. The pull of recognition, the echo of loyalty older than their lives. For a heartbeat, the entire palace stood on the edge of revelation. Then the throne spoke. Not with words, with light. The radiance poured from behind the sealed gate, washing over the chamber like sunrise through a wound. It was neither warm nor cold. It was absolute. Shapes moved within it, silhouettes too vast to comprehend, flickering like memories given form. Valen fell to her knees, screaming as the truth filled her veins. She saw everything, the wars, the dreams, the betrayal, and the endless burden of a god who never wanted to be worshipped. She saw the Emperor's face, not as the Imperium imagined it, but as he had been. Human, brilliant, and heartbreakingly tired. And through that light, I heard his thought. I made them too well. They remember without understanding. I stepped closer to the throne, the heat scorching even me. "Then end it," I said. "Let them see what you were." "I cannot," came the whisper. "They would not survive the truth." "Then you will die in silence," I said, "and they will die believing the silence was love." For a moment the light faltered, as though he considered it. Then it surged again, fierce, defiant. "You are not me." "No," I said softly. "I am what you forgot." The walls cracked. The throne's machine spirit screamed. Lightning arced between the pillars, burning holes in the air itself. The custodes raised their spears, not to strike, but to shield, not from me, but from the truth unraveling around us. Valen rose, clutching her chest. "Stop," she cried. "If you tear this open, there will be nothing left. No Astronomicon, no Imperium, no hope." Her words hung between us, fragile as glass, and for the first time I hesitated. I could see them, billions of lives flickering like candles across the galaxy. The soldiers who fought believing they served a god. The workers who whispered prayers into the dark. The children who drew wings on cracked walls. Humanity, flawed and wretched and magnificent. To reveal the truth would free them, or destroy them. The throne pulsed again, sending a wave of gold through the room. Valen staggered, tears burning her eyes. "Please," she whispered. "Don't make me choose between faith and truth." The custodes turned to her, their golden masks unreadable. And one of them, the same who had once guarded the gate of silence, spoke in a voice that trembled like the edge of dawn. "The Emperor cannot choose," he said. "So the memory must." The decision pressed down like the weight of a dying star. My wings burned with the strain. Every cell of my being screamed with paradox. To stay was to lie. To speak was to end all things built in his name. In that moment, I finally understood what the Emperor had carried all this time. The burden of love without mercy. I reached toward the throne, and light met light. The impact shook the palace. Rippling through the warp like a heartbeat felt across every star. Ships in the void saw a second sun rise above Terra. On every world, psychers fell to their knees as visions of fire filled their minds. And within the impossible brightness, I felt the Emperor's sorrow one last time. "Forgive me, my son." "There is nothing to forgive," I said. "You taught me what must endure." The light collapsed inward, devouring itself, and the world fell silent. When the radiance cleared, the throne was still, its glow dim but steady. Valen stood shaking, her armor scorched, her eyes filled with tears. The custodes lowered their weapons. I was gone, only a single feather remained, floating gently down through the air, gold at the edges, dark at the core. She caught it in trembling hands and whispered the last words I would ever hear. He remembered. Outside, the Astronomicon reignited, brighter, purer than before. Ships found their course again. The Imperium did not know what had happened, but across the hives and cathedrals of mankind, a new phrase began to spread like dawn breaking through endless night. The Emperor dreams, and we are his memory. In the wake of the light, the Imperium did not fall. It endured. That more than anything was the proof of humanity's nature, to stagger on, blind and bleeding, yet still reaching for the divine. But the world that remained was not the same as before. The Astronomicon blazed again, its beam steady but no longer cold. It no longer pulsed like a machine sustained by sacrifice. It breathed. The navigator spoke of a strange warmth in its rhythm, as though a human heart now beat at its center. None dared record it officially. The Adeptus Terra erased such whispers as heresy before they reached the High Lord's ears. But rumor is the lifeblood of faith, and faith once changed cannot be unmade. I was gone. Or so they believed. Yet traces of me haunted the halls of the Imperial Palace, the blackened marble where my wings had touched, the melted aquilus that refused to be reforged, and the feather Valen kept sealed inside a reliquary of adamantine glass. She had not spoken since that night. For months she walked the silent cloisters of the palace, haunted by what she had seen. The custodes watched her, neither arresting nor releasing her, as if unsure whether she was prisoner or witness. Outside Terra, the ripples spread. On distant shrine worlds, statues of the Emperor began to weep golden light. On hive planets, entire manufactoria halted mid-labor, when workers saw fire blossom in their assembly lines without consuming a thing. The ecclesiarchy tried to suppress it, branding these as warp anomalies, but the people whispered otherwise. They said the Emperor had spoken, not through sermons or saints, but through change itself. Valen knew the truth, or at least the part of it she could bear. In the solitude of her cell, she replayed the moment when the throne had opened its light, and the words that burned into her heart. The Emperor dreams, and we are his memory. It was not revelation, it was confession. Humanity had never worshipped a god. It had sustained one. But understanding such a thing was dangerous. So, on the night of her disappearance, she left a single data slate behind, encrypted, marked only with the symbol of a burning feather. Within it a message: he still lives, not as we imagine, not as we deserve. If faith was the fire that sustained him, then memory is the fuel that remains. Do not pray for his return. Remember what he was. They called her a heretic. The Inquisition purged her records, erasing her name from every archive. Yet the stories spread faster than the censors could burn them. Pilgrims began to gather in the wastelands beyond the palace walls, men and women from across the Imperium, whispering her words like litany. They did not kneel before icons anymore. They lit candles for the dead and called them the Emperor's dreams. A new movement took form, nameless at first, then whispered as the Pilgrimage of Light. It began as a rumor, a murmur among soldiers and shipwrights, miners and serfs. They carried relics of remembrance, bones, tools, torn fragments of armor, not to glorify but to recall. They said the Emperor did not need worship, only witness. The ecclesiarchy branded them apostates. The Ordo Hereticus began the purges. Shrines were burned, reliquaries shattered, and still the pilgrim spread. You cannot unteach what has already been felt. And across the stars something stirred, as though the galaxy itself remembered that once, humanity had built empires not from fear but from will. Somewhere in the warp, a shape of light drifted, neither alive nor dead, bound by neither body nor law. I watched them. I saw Valen's followers cross the desert wastes of holy Terra, under a sky filled with ash and dawn. I saw the custodes who had once guarded the throne lower their spears and walk beside them. I saw the banners of the ecclesiarchy burn, not from rebellion but from revelation. I had become a story. That was how all gods end, not in glory, but in myth, diluted, retold, and reborn through the mouths of those who never saw the truth. But this time the story was not about conquest, nor judgment, nor vengeance. It was about remembering, that fragile act of defiance that had kept mankind human even through 10,000 years of madness. The last time Valen was seen, she walked barefoot across the ash plains, the reliquary feather hanging from her neck. The custodes did not stop her. The Inquisition lost her trail. Some say she reached the edge of the Sanctum Imperialis and vanished in a storm of light. Others say she became a saint, though no church dared name her. But I know the truth, she did not die. She joined me, not in body, but in memory. Her thoughts reached me across the void, carried by every human who still dared to ask why. In her and in them, I found what the Emperor had long sought, a reason to believe that even gods could be forgiven. The warp trembled with that understanding. I felt eyes turn toward me, ancient, hateful, divine. The great game paused, if only for a heartbeat, as the powers beyond the veil sensed something they had not felt in millennia. Balance. A god reborn not through worship, but remembrance. I did not rise again as ruler or savior. I became something quieter, a whisper carried in the hum of the Astronomicon, a warmth felt by dying soldiers on distant worlds, a flicker of light in the depths of void ships when all other power failed. The Imperium would never know it by name, but it would live by it. And on nights when the stars burned low and the silence of the throne grew unbearable, I would still hear the Emperor's voice, faint as the echo of a heartbeat in the dark. You carried what I could not. And I would answer, you remembered what I became. The galaxy turned. The wars continued. Faith fractured, rebuilt, endured. But beneath it all, a new truth glowed like embers beneath ash, that even in the farthest reaches of despair, memory was the last light that would never die. The galaxy is endless, but memory outlasts even stars. Long after the names of worlds are lost to ash, long after the last manufactorum cools and the last gun falls silent, what remains is not empire, but the echo of those who believed. Centuries passed. Perhaps millennia. The Imperium endured as it always had, not unchanged but unbroken. The ecclesiarchy split itself in secret schism, warring not over faith but interpretation. Some preached that the Emperor had withdrawn to dream again, his light sustained by the devotion of the living. Others whispered that the Astronomicon was no longer his beacon, but a shared one, the collective memory of mankind burning together as a single will. They were both right, in their way. The custodes. Once golden statues of obedience became wanderers. One by one they left Terra. Some said they sought forgiveness. Others said they carried his silence into the stars, guarding nothing but the meaning of what had been. When one of them died, their armor was left standing in the place they fell, a new kind of shrine, not to victory, but to choice. Pilgrims walked entire lifetimes to touch those empty suits of gold. The pilgrimage of light never vanished. It grew quieter, deeper, folding itself into the hidden arteries of humanity like veins of molten belief. It became less a movement and more a memory, a pulse carried from parent to child, soldier to comrade, whispered in the bunkers and corridors of void ships. They no longer prayed to the Emperor. They prayed for him, and through it all I remained, not as god, nor demon, nor angel, but as the faint rhythm behind the Astronomicon's glow. I did not speak. I did not command. I only remembered, for that was all I had ever been meant to do, to bear witness to what mankind could be when stripped of everything but hope. There were nights, if such things can exist beyond time, when I drifted across the warp like dust across an infinite sea. I saw the wounds of creation still bleeding, the great predators of the void circling worlds of fire and ice. I saw orcs still warring for the joy of it, necrons awakening beneath dead suns, Tyranids carving hunger into the stars. I saw the madness of chaos eternal, the Four still whispering, still waiting for man to forget who he was. But I also saw small things. A dying guardsman, his chest torn open, whispering his daughter's name into the dust. A sister of battle holding the line long after her faith had broken, because her comrades needed one more heartbeat of courage. A child on a frontier moon drawing wings in the ash with her finger and asking the void to remember her father. In those moments, I felt something no god had ever known, peace, because they were enough. The Imperium no longer needed me as savior. Humanity no longer needed a god to remind them of their worth. They had become their own memory, and in that they had finally transcended what even the Emperor had dreamed. Valen's relic and the feather one remained in the palace long, after the structure itself began to sink, beneath the shifting crust of Terra. Pilgrims still came to see it, though few now understood what it truly was. Some claimed it was a fragment of the Emperor's light. Others said it belonged to an angel who fell for mankind's sins. It did not matter. What mattered was that they felt something when they looked upon it, a quiet reminder of a time when even gods bled for love. There would be other wars, other empires. Humanity would fracture and rise again, But somewhere in the distant ages to come, when even the stars themselves began to fade, someone, some lone soul, would still whisper those same words into the dark. The Emperor dreams, and we are his memory. And the void would answer. Not with thunder, not with divine fire, but with the faint hum of light that had never truly gone out. The Astronomican's last pulse, the breath of mankind made eternal. Perhaps that was what the Emperor had always intended, not to rule forever, but to fade into them. To become the sum of their courage, their defiance, their grief. To leave the galaxy not as a monument to his will, but as a living echo of his sacrifice. When the final navigator saw the last flicker of the Astronomican die, they did not cry. They smiled, because even as the light went out, they heard the whisper of wings. And far beyond time, beyond the warp and the dying stars, I stood at the edge of the silence, looking back upon everything that had been. The wars, the prayers, the fire, the endless chain of faith and loss and memory. And I understood at last that there was no difference between God and man, between the Emperor and his creation. We had always been the same dream, split in two. I stepped forward into the dark, carrying that thought like a flame cupped in my hands. The stars folded behind me, and the galaxy exhaled. Somewhere a voice, faint, familiar, and called my name. My son. I turned smiling. Father. Then there was only light, and the memory of mankind burned on.